Just asking.
Okay. Okay, the webinar is going live in a few seconds.
Yeah, it is. It says it is live. Just asking.
Okay. The webinar is going live in a few seconds.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so shall we start?
Yeah,
Yes,
you.
go ahead. Yes.
I think we can start. Yeah.
Okay. Assalamualaikum and good day to wherever you're listening to this session from. My name is Nur Netusha. I'm the program coordinator of Islam and Liberty Network. We are very delighted to welcome you to this month's installment of our webinar series titled Edraak, Recognizing Liberty. Today's topic is about Bangladesh, future of liberty and rule of law. In this session, we dive into the current political landscape in Bangladesh, where Hasina Wajid's iron grip has raised critical questions about the balance between economic prosperity and political freedom. Will the recent street protests and interim government lead to a new era of liberty and rule of law? So, what shall we expect in this webinar today? We are going to be examining the success and struggle of liberty and rule of law in Bangladesh and how they might speak to historic upheavals and other attempts in Muslim majority countries. And we will also be reflecting on the progress to reform political institutions and civil liberties in Bangladesh in particular. Today, we have two esteemed panelists. First, I would like to introduce Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Tauhidul Islam, who is a professor of Bangladesh Studies and a director of this program at the International Islamic University of Chittagong in Bangladesh, who is we are also very grateful to have as our institutional partner for this webinar. Dr. Tohidul is also our ILN's Bangladesh Fellow. Then we are accompanied by Dr. Moniruz Zaman Muhammad, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Sharjah. He has an expertise in comparative politics and Islamic thought. And for this entire session, it will be moderated by ILN's very own CEO, Dr. Ali Salman. So without further ado, let me hand over the floor to Dr. Ali Salman to make some quick remarks, and we shall begin the discussion in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noor. And let me also join you in welcoming our guests, Dr. Tawheed and Dr. Munir Zaman, on this important panel discussion. The purpose of ILN, the mission of ILN, is to explore the ideas of economic, religious, and political freedom in Muslim countries and beyond. Bangladesh is a very important country in the region and in the world, and certainly recent events in Bangladesh has been raising questions about the rule of law, about economic freedom, about political freedom. And it is, I think, quite intriguing that despite, as per the reported, in the press, despite the development in terms of economic development, Bangladesh rise in the exports market, there have been consistent voices in Bangladesh for the last few years, raising voice on the political suppression by the ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. I've been talking to friends in Bangladesh, including Tawhidul Islam in the past, that how these two tendencies have existed together. Both this an urge to modernize, having a new infrastructure in Bangladesh, which is of course important, and becoming part of the international supply chain, particularly in textiles, bringing more people on job, but at the same time raising questions about the rule of law and political freedom. So how these conditions can coexist, because I think that's a dilemma, that's a puzzle that we are trying to solve in today's discussion. But I think more importantly, what holds for the future? Because obviously this particular event, which led to violence, and it was very unfortunate, of course, loss of human lives is certainly very unfortunate anywhere in Bangladesh in particular. But then it was welcomed also. The change is seemingly welcomed by people at large. And our scholars today, who are both from Bangladesh, although teaching at different places, different universities, will share their views on that. So without further ado, I will request Dr. Tawhidul Islam to share his thoughts first, and then we'll move to Dr. Munir. So Dr. Tawheed, would you like to start as your presentation?
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
It's okay. I am very much delighted to be invited here in this ILN webinar. And I'd like to thank ILN for organizing this webinar, especially on the situations in my country. I have prepared this presentation with the title Fall of Sheikh Hasina's Authoritarian Regime in Bangladesh, Future of Democracy and Rule of Law. Bangladesh, which emerged as an independent country in 1971. The principal aspirations of the country during the time of liberation were basically social equality, human dignity, and social justice. Since the independence of Bangladesh, it has been striving for freedom and democracy. Despite being tarnished by a number of military dictatorships in particular, democracy was established in the country in 1991 with a very free and a free election in 1991. After 1991, what happened in the country? Major political parties, particularly Awami League and BNP, two major political parties, had been ruling the country. But after the election in December 2008, Awami League came in power, and without any interest from the party has been in power until the recent mass upsurge in July 2024. And for the first time in the history of Bangladesh, a political party had been in power for more than 15 years. And Awami League finally had to resign in the face of mass upsurge in July 2024. And the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina had to leave the country, and it was happened for the first time in Bangladesh that in the face of a much absurd, the Prime Minister not only had to resign, but also had to leave the country. And during the time of mass upsurge, more than 1,500 people lost their lives. On August 5, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina finally fled the country. This Awami regime, which started from 2009 till 2024, it was marked by massive corruption, economic nosedive, suppression of opposition, the politicization of all governmental institutions, constitutional bodies, and rigging of all national or local elections. The regime has been characterized as an authoritarian one, and also by some critics as a fascist one. The main character of that regime was it was an authoritarian government with absolute power in prime ministers. And we know that in a democratic system, in every state, there are three co-equal branches: executive, legislative, and judiciary. But all these three branches are absolutely brought under the control of only one powerful prime minister, Sheikh Hasina. Definitely, he was the head of executive, but the legislative, it was brought under his control with all rigged national elections. Judiciary, it was frequently interfered by the executive, by the political leaders, and it was used by the regime to harass the opposition political party leaders or workers. And even during the time of recent movement, High Court was used to inhibit the students' movement. We know there was a verdict to suppress the movement. So all these three branches, executive, legislative, and judiciary, fully brought under the absolute control of prime minister. We know a very big, a famous incident, a 15th amendment into the constitution, which was the largest amendment in the constitutional history of the country. And it is well known among the political people that even Awami League leaders, they also were not in support of 15th amendment into the constitution, but it was happened only because of the wish of prime minister. So all those bodies, there was nothing without the wish, without the consent of the prime minister. Electoral democracy, we of course know that arrangement of a free and fair election is one of the most crucial components of democracy, while the opposition's positive role in counteracting the governmental activity. These two components have been the principal elements for the development of democracy. But these two elements were destructed by the regime. All the national elections, as we see here, in 2024 election, because of massive pre-election violation, the main political party, BNP, boycotted the election. And what happened as a result? Out of 300 seats, Awami League secured 153 seats without any contest. That means without an election, Awami League got the victory in majority seats. So finally, Awami League won 234 out of 300 seats. It was basically not an election, and there was no election at minimum no election in 153 seats. Following in the next following national election of 2018, BNP, the main opposition political party, participated the election. But what happened because of violation by the law enforcing agencies and arresting hundreds of opposition party leaders and workers, and even they did not participate in their election campaign. Awami League secured out of 300 seats 257, while BNP secured only 6 seats. So that meant there was ultimately no opposition. Finally, what happened in the last year in election 2024, no political party participated in the election except dummy candidates set by Awami League. That means it was competition only between Awami League members. There was no opposition, and Awami League itself set some dummy candidates to make the election as an election, or to make some competitions. What happened? Awami League and its dummy candidates secured 286 out of 300. So all those three national elections, or through all those three national elections, electoral democracy, it was completely destroyed under the regime. Judiciary, we know independence of judiciary, which is very fundamental to establish rule of law. But what happened in case of Bangladesh in the last 15 years? Judiciary, it was completely demoralized, politicized by the regime, and not even from Supreme Court to all the lower courts. Judicial personnel, they were politically appointed, and they gave hundreds of verdicts being motivated or sometimes being ordered by the executive branch of administration. We can give one or two more examples that S. Alam Group, which is very widely nowadays discussed in the country. It was alleged for money laundering. But when some cases were filed, High Court gave the verdict that no investigation would be continued against S. Alam Group's money laundering, because this money laundering, it was not only done by the group, but it was being associated with the high people of governments. And many influential political leaders, especially the Jamaat Islami leaders, central leaders, they were sentenced to death in the name of war crimes through so-called international crime tribunals, which was a very politically a very good example how judiciary was used by politically used by the regime. Even government. Another example we can give, that Surendra Kumar Sinha, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was the main person to declare some verdicts through the international crime tribunals, which finally approved by the Supreme Court under his leadership for sentencing death the political leaders. But because of some misunderstanding between Chief Justice and Prime Minister, what happened? It was a very heartbreaking example that Sinha finally had to resign from his office first, then finally he had to leave the country. This is a book written by Sinha, A Broken Dream, Surendra Kumar Sinha. It was a book. He is now residing most probably in the US. And in his book, he claimed that military intelligence services on behalf of the government ultimately intimidated him to leave the country. and he described Bangladesh as a country ruled by state terrorism, and he made comparison between the regime's aggressive policies and practices and the practices of Hitler. So when just kind of criticism comes from the Chief Justice, it can be understood that how judiciary was politicized by the government. So there are just kind of too many examples, and even judiciary was the principal tool to harass the opposition political party leaders. Demoralizing the military through BDR mutiny. We know national election was held in December 2008, and in the beginning of 2009, on 25th February, a very tragic history what happened in the country. 57 who were very patriot, brilliant army officers. They were selected. They were deployed in BDR, which was BDR, Bangladesh Rifles, now BGB, Bangladesh Border Guard, Bangladesh. 57 military officers, they were deployed in BGB, and on 25th February, in the name of mutiny, BDR mutiny, all of them were killed. Although it has widely been spread as a mutiny, but nowadays there are many evidences are revealed today. It can be claimed that it was basically not a mutiny. It was a pre-planned killing of patriot, sincere, brilliant army officers, even with the involvement of some intelligence agencies of some, even there are some names of neighboring countries. So it was a very
sorry for interruption. My apologies, Dr. Tawhidul Islam, for interruption. Just for the time management, because we have a number of slides ahead to present, I'll just request that maybe you can 7 or 8 minutes if you can complete the presentation, and then we'll come back to the discussion.
Yeah, it's okay. I will finish within a few minutes.
Thank you. My apologies.
Good, sir. It was a very tragic history, and then entire military was completely demoralized. Since then military was used by the government only as a tool, particularly in extrajudicial killings, disappearing the people, in just kind of many activities. Military intelligence agencies were involved. Extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearance, these two were the most cruel elements used by the government to prolong its the regime. And there are only few information. 2,699 people that became the victims of extrajudicial killings, abduction 677 people, deaths in custody 1,048 people. All those extrajudicial killings and abductions were basically happened to the people who were very influential in the society, or the influential local leaders, political leaders, or influential in any other cases. They became the victims of enforced disappearances. They were later killed, or sometimes produced before the court, or sometimes they were abducted. State control over mass media. We know that media is a very important part for the development of democracy, but the government enacted some law, especially Cyber Security Act in 2023, which enabled the government, permitted the government to arrest anyone without or with a very simple acquisition and without any official arrest order. And the cyber securities prosecution, it was non-bailable. Hundreds of journalists, they were harassed under the this draconian law, Cyber Security Act. Because of Cyber Security Act, the journalists, they were one kind of, they felt themselves for a self-censorship. All the news agencies, online platforms, or print medias or electronic medias, they were restricted from publishing the original scenario, what happened in the country. All those medias, they were belong to self-censorship, and so there was basically no active or true mass media in the country during the last 15 years. Mass killing, the government executed some very well-known mass killings, because especially Operation Flush Out at Shapla Chattor on 5th or 6th May 2013. It was a rally, it was a demonstration by an Islamist group, Hafazat Islam, namely, with their demand of executing 13-point charter. But in the midnight, what happened? In the midnight, law enforcement agencies, they openly fired on the demonstration. Hundreds of people were killed, and all the streets were washed during the time of morning. And in the morning, all the people of Dhaka city saw that there was none, and everything was cleaned. So it was a very planned mass killing of the government. And 7 murder, that was another very well-known mass murder. 7 persons, political influential leaders, who were abducted first by the Rapid Action Battalion, and they were killed later. Entire bureaucracy from secretariat to field level, it was completely politicized. The high bureaucrats who led the politicization process, they were later rewarded by the government. For example, a number of high bureaucrats who contributed in the politicization process of bureaucracy, they were given nomination as parliament members by Awami League. During the time of fresh recruitment, only Awami League members were recruited. So entire bureaucracy, it was completely politicized, and it was the principal tool who contributed in prolonging the regime, especially during the time of national election. Human rights, we know extrajudicial killings, etc. These were a massive violation of human rights, and the people who talked in favor of human rights, they were brought under the charge of Cyber Security Act. We know famous organization Odhikar, which is the most popular rights organization in the country. Its Secretary Adilur Rahman Khan, A.S.M. Nasiruddin, all of them were sentenced to imprisonment because of publishing reports against or about the mass killing, about the violation of human rights. Sheikh Hasina, he was very skilled in blaming the opposition. After every incident, even after BDR mutiny, mass murder in 2013, student revolution 2024, every time he blindly blamed the opposition. So even after all elections, government claimed that the election was held free and fair. So blaming the opposition, and it was focused in the mainstream media. That was another tool which was used by the authoritarian regime during the last 15 years. Economic corruption, there are hundreds of reports. In just few days before the resignation of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, there was a report which published that $5 billion from a nuclear power plant. It was involved with not only the Prime Minister, his son Shazibazir Joy, his nice Tulip Siddiqui, who is a member of parliament in the UK. All of them were involved in this nuclear power plant corruption. Thousands crore people, thousands of dollars laundered from the country. There are too many reports, too many information. I know we have very few time. So all those things, there are a number of reports in Al Jazeera, all the Prime Minister's man, Minister's million. These reports next how the government was involved in economic corruption. Although there are some stories about the economic development, infrastructural development, or in terms of GDP growth, but in terms of press freedom, democracy freedom, corruption perception index, or political rights, civil liberties, for all those indices, the scores of Bangladesh has deteriorated from 2009 in 2024. So we have some very major challenges that there the people believe that, civil society believe that still now there is possibility of counter revolution being aided by some local forces and being aided by some intelligence agencies of some other countries. So that the big challenge for the interim government is to counter or is to resist all the possibilities of counter revolution and overcome all Awami legacy. There, we know majority people think that the problem of democracy is basically rooted in the constitutional process. Constitution which was passed in 1972, basically it, according to many people, it did not embody the aspiration of all people. So there are demands for constitutional rewriting even, although not rewriting, but massive constitutional reform is required. Every state institution or reform of state institution is required, economic reform is required, and culture of democracy in politics, it should be cultivated. We know in the subcontinental history, there is one kind of dynastic succession history in politics. So democracy should be cultivated, should be practiced in within political parties, in state politics. And geopolitical changes, we know India was the biggest supporter of the authoritarian regime, and during the election of 2004 or even 2014, 18, it was supported by the US government. But before 2024 election, US did not support Awami regime. But finally, even the US, they surrendered to the Indian idea of supporting Sheikh Hasina. But what happened now, India became very frustrated with the fall of Sheikh Hasina, while interim government led by Dr. Yunus, that is supported by the US. So there may be some split can occur between India and America, while also there is some involvement with China. So all those geopolitical factors, especially three players, the US and India and China, because of the involvement of those three players, or these geopolitical challenges also will contribute in shaping the future of the country. So with these few words, I would like to conclude my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tawhidul Islam, for what I would say is a very sobering presentation on the last few years' history of political and legal history, in which we see clearly a violation of the principles of rule of law and individual freedom in Bangladesh at the cost of the stability, peace, and even the inclusive economic development, as you have pointed out. There are many questions and interesting and questions, but I will request the participants to just wait for our second and final presentation today, and then we will open up the floor for the questions. And I will request now Dr. Muniruzzaman to share his thoughts on the topic today. Over to you, Dr. Muniruzzaman.
It's good afternoon over there and everywhere, I suppose. And thank you very much for arranging this interesting session. And we are quite behind the time schedule, I suppose. So I'll try to be as short as possible in my presentation. Dr. Tawhidul has given a very succinct description and graphic description of what has happened to Bangladesh economically, socially, politically over the past about 17 years. So I didn't go into those descriptions. At the expense of repeating those, I will rather try to argue from a different dimension, but based on the storyline that he has presented. So in this presentation, I will argue for that what has been happening in Bangladesh over the past 1.5 decades and how it has ended on 5th of August this year is actually a national soul-searching march. And what I term here as researching of a national identity. So it is not just the forcing of the fascist regime or just the achievement of the regime change. That is not all about the storyline, what has unfolded over the past 1.5 months. But there's a big storyline behind what has happened recently, and that is what I'm going to talk about in this discussion. Well, the basic inspirations of the July Revolution, if I can summarize, that is the manifest time span that what unfolded before us is like July and August of this year, and led by the students. Actually, the student community, they originated as well as they led with the banner anti-discriminatory movement. This was a platform without any political affiliation by them, or they invited anyone or any political parties until very towards the later stage of their movement. Their initial demand was very simple, one demand, that was reform of the discriminatory and undue quota system in the public sector job. That was very legitimate, very straightforward. That was the only demand they started with from the beginning of July. But then the government came with suppressing hand with killing of some of them, some of the students. That turned the situation into a different level. What I call it expanded demands. At that time they came up with 9 demands, basic demands, based on what has happened during that time, which I call intermediate social scale. Why? Because by that time, a quite large group of societies, of people of common work, that they started to be concerned as well as taking part in the movement. And then it went further, it escalated further, and the government became more repressive, which backfired. And eventually, at the cost of about 1,500 lives or so, that the demand actually got reduced to just one again. That is the removal of the fascist regime. That's all. And that happened on 5th of August. But in doing so, what behind the storyline, what I can read is this argument that behind this revolution lies a very trembling subconscious mind of the nation in search of a stable national identity. This is my main argument, and this is what I read behind the storyline of the July Revolution. And this is how I explained it. The initial demand, that was just the reforming of the civil service laws and the quota system in the civil service job. It was just a symbolic manifestation of the identity divide. Why is this? We have to look at the larger picture of the national identity here, that they called it discrimination. When you call it discrimination, means there is something big storyline behind that. And the manifestation of that storyline just appeared in just in one simple issue. There's the public sector job. Like this discrimination had a nationwide and the national-wide scope and scale. What I mentioned here, a number of them, like discrimination appeared in this way, like Awami League, the ruling party on one side, and the rest of the nation on the other side. So it's a huge discrimination. Then the nation was divided into a pro-independence group and then anti-independence group. That was a huge discrimination against a huge section of the nation. In this way, like the nation was divided into secular as well as Islamic and Muslim identity divide. Then another dimension was the Bengali ethnic identity and the Bangladeshi Muslim identity divide. And then the pro-Indian divide, pro-Indian as well as anti-Indian divide. And then those with haves and those who do not have. This was a big divide. If we remember what Dr. Tawhidul has presented in terms of economic rights and discrimination and political rights and discriminations, all these divides are also clear in his explanation as well. The next level or the next scale of the movement was the expanded demand, where 9-point demands were made. These 9-point demands were based on what was happening on the ground at that time, how the government became repressive and how the people were being deprived of their political and citizenship rights. And those were very much outburst against the suppression of human liberty, of citizenship liberty in the country, not just during this 1.5 decade of time, but it reflected the entire, a longer period of the national history, which I tried to document here. This outburst was a legitimate student demand, which was supported very enthusiastically as well as willingly by the greater society. So these 9-point demands or these extended demands were reflections of the people's voice for vote and citizenship right that was to be liberated, that was denied for about 1.5 decades. Now this voice was to be liberated. Voice for life, liberty, and property was to be liberated. Voice against corruption was to be liberated. Voice against extrajudicial murder, forced disappearance was also to be liberated. Voice against pro-Indian policies was to be, voice against pro-Indian policies was to be liberated. Voice in favor of Islam was to be liberated. You would note that all these things, or the entire nation under 1.5 decades, they were not able to speak their mind about those things, or political rights, voting rights, or their economic rights, or extrajudicial killing, or forced disappearance, or any policies that the government has taken towards India. Those, or even talking about Islam or Islamic religious rights and duties. All those issues, on all those issues, the nation was completely almost captivated for 1.5 decades. So the nation couldn't speak of their mind about their rights, about their duties, as well as their expectations from the government. So this expanded demand was actually those 9-point demands at that level was actually an outburst of the suppression of the liberty on all dimensions of life, the national life, during 1.5 decade. Then the ultimate demand that was forcing the regime to step down. This was a national explosion against the identity divide. That at that time, the entire nation jumped in to the street and asking for the change of the regime. And that was very much symbolic. Symbolic in the sense that it was not just one to remove the government from power, but to construct or to look for a different identity, for a complete different identity, separate identity for the entire nation. And that was an expectation, that was an expression of the national will at that time, from pro-Indian fascism to anti-Indian Bangladeshi patriotism, from Bengali exclusivism, that is the ethnic identity that the earlier government tried to shape, to Bangladeshi inclusivism, and from secular Hinduism to Islamic nationalism. The previous government wanted to promote the secular Hindu cultural elements as national culture, against which through this explosion, the entire nation wanted to speak about its own Islamic national culture and heritage. Why this identity question? At this point, I would like to ask, why this identity question after 50 years of independence? This is very much legitimate to ask. But I argued from this perspective that why I read behind the storyline of this revolution, that it was actually in quest of a national identity. I argued that the national identity issue remained unresolved for last 150 years. The Bangladesh got independence for a little over 50 years ago, but then actually the identity question remained unresolved for over 150 years. So the time span is actually longer than 1.5 decades. If we talk about the national identity question, and it is because of the national identity question that the nation, the government, they did not or could not speak on behalf of the people all the time during the past. like if we go back to the beginning of the earliest and last century, 1905 and 1911, during this time, the entire Bengal, the West Bengal part of India and Bangladesh today, and some of the surrounding areas, these were divided into two. Bangladesh, the East Bengal was created during that time as a different administrative region, separate from West Bengal. But then the Hindu nationalist group on the other side, on the West Bengal side, they opposed this creation, this division. This creation itself gave a national identity to the people of East Bengal during that time. But because this partition was failed in 1911, so the identity remained unrealized. Then came 1945 until 1975, when Pakistan was created and Bangladesh became part of Pakistan. But immediately after the creation of Bangladesh, that the Bangladesh independence movement started with the name of Bengali ethnic identity, which was different from the West Pakistani identities. So at that time, even though it was a Muslim, highly Muslim populated society, but then the identity was shaped along the ethnic line. So the true feeling, the cultural, the religious, and the national feeling of the people were actually deceived by aligning them along the ethnic line. Then came 72 to 75, when independence was gained, and then immediately the new government tried to reshape a national identity along the communist and socialist and secular line, which was again a deception with the people. So the true identity was negated and denied. Then came 1980 and then 2008. During this time, a number of government came in, and they did not resolve the national identity. They oscillated between the secular government and Bangladeshi nationalist government, a flavor of Islamic identity, etc. But so the national religion, for example, state religion was declared along this line, but then it was again debated. So the identity of the nation was actually remained unresolved there. Then 2009 and 2024, this is the time the Hasina regime was there. During this time, a national identity was attempted to reshape as pro-Indian Bengali anti-Islamic identity for the nation, which was a clear betrayal and negation of the culture, the religious, and the national sentiments of the entire people. So here again, the identity was negated and denied. So you see, for 150 years, the national identity question was not resolved, rather was politically being played against each other. So what has exploded 1.5 months ago was actually containing a subconscious dimension of this search for national identity. Once this identity is fixed, then based on this identity, the national policies and international policies, foreign policies of the state can only be made. So this search for reconstruction of or reforming of the constitution or political system, etc., that the interim government today they are attempting to do, behind all this actually lie this dimension of subconscious mind of the entire people, to let the people resolve the identity issue, who they are actually, to let the people speak for their ownership of the agency of the state, that the state as an agent for them to act on behalf of them, state became rather a suppressing institution. State was owned by a particular group, a handful of group, and it was not owned by the people at all. So this ownership, the reversal of the ownership is actually is what the reform agenda or the reform intention behind. To let the people speak for and enjoy their rights and liberties. It's very clear that they couldn't speak of their mind for 1.5 decades, and now this is what they are looking for. So actually they are looking for their self, discovery of their self. To let the people construct the social framework of the national mosaic, that they want to construct an inclusive society. That means the social framework of the nation would be constructed in a way where the national reality, enthusiasm, as well as the heritage of the people are to be reflected there. And finally, to let the unified national identity guide the formulation of national and foreign policies. Only if the national identity is resolved, then the national policies as well as foreign policies can only be shaped according to that national identity. So if those are achieved, only this will ensure the future of liberty and rule of law in Bangladesh. We hope what the student movement has brought forward to the entire nation, that this time at least the nation will be able to resolve with its national identity and stand on its own in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muniruzzaman. This is a very thoughtful presentation. I think in a way it complements the earlier presentation by Dr. Tawheedul Islam and explores the issue of identity as an explanation and a framework. And clearly that you have argued that because the suppression and because the absence almost of individual freedom of expression, the situation has become so worse. And this issue of identity can clearly be, I think, managed, or can clearly be not managed, but perhaps accommodated in a more open and liberal democracy, which is, of course, not the case. In Bangladesh, and let me also say, perhaps not even in Pakistan or in India for that matter. So we have this perhaps South Asian challenge and overall, but we'll come to that. I have already received many questions and comments. I'm jumping on those. I'm conscious that our speaker, Dr. Tawheedul Islam, will have to leave in about 20 minutes. We may continue a little over that because we want to cover all the questions which have been raised. Some of the questions which I saw, actually you already answered. For instance, the role of students, which was asked by Dr. Khalid Masood, the role of regional power, India, US, I think you have commented on that. But there's like one question or two questions, maybe I'll request Dr. Tawheedul Islam to address first. And one is the reconciliation of different political factions, including Jamaat-e-Islami and other political factions in the future. I mean, you have already given a very comprehensive background in the past, but then where do you see this reconciliation to happen? And also, it's a specific question to you again, by Fidaur Rahman for Tawheedul Islam. And the question is there any possibility that the youth-led revolutionary political setup will not repeat the same undemocratic, rather anti-democratic? That's an interesting distinction here, undemocratic and anti-democratic practice, as was the Sheikh Hasina, because this was if this is the change instrument which is acknowledged, then what will happen if there is a future repeat of similar episode? Do you think challenges for civil liberties and true ideals for democracy ahead? So Dr. Tawheed, would you like to address that question?
First question, which was about the political reconciliation. Yeah. That is very interesting one. in the last 15 years, there was very difficult time, especially for Jamaat Islami. And all the top leaders of Jamaat Islami, including their Amir, Maulana Matiur Rahman Nizami, including Maulana Dalwar Hassan Saidi, who was a very popular religious speaker in the country, Ghulam Azam, who was the leader of Jamaat Islami. Most of them were given lifetime imprisonment or they were sentenced to death. And all the local central offices of this political party were banned during the last 15 years. They had no minimum scope to do their political activities at central level to even at local or village level. But what happened after the fall of after this revolution? Whenever head of military uh, uh, invited the political leaders, and he specifically mentioned the name of Amir of Jamaat Islami in the public declaration, which brought Jamaat Islami again in front of political situation. And again, after the revolution, once the government was formed, led by Dr. Yunus, it has been uh, observed by many people that the student wing of Jamaat Islami, which is Islami Chhatra Shibir, the workers, supporters of Islami Chhatra Shibir, or most of them were behind the success of this movement led by the students. Majority students or the student movement or behind the success of the student movement, there was a very big role of especially Islamic Chhatra Shibir or the student wing of Jamaat Islami. So, and in present situation, still now the political leaders or the political aspirants for Jamaat Islami is very open, and they are very or engaging their activities openly. So I think that in any future political development, all those political groups, including religious groups or secular groups, they will have a space in any political future of the country. And religious groups, there are many other religious groups. Jamaat Islam is the biggest one. There are some other Islamist political parties. They are now trying to establish themselves as a united Islamist political group, not being with nationalist party or not being with Awami League, but they are now trying to be an independent Islamic political group. If the unity would be established among the Islamist political groups, I think there will be a good possibility or possibility of success of Islamist groups, especially of Jamaat Islami. If the political reforms will happen, of course, there will be reconciliated and they will be accommodated in the future political agenda. Next question, which was by friend Fidaur Rahman. May I see?
So the question was, is there any risk for this episode being
A
you know,
possibility
in
that
the
the
future?
youth-led revolutionary political setup will not repeat the same undemocratic practices as well as the students groups. Now they are basically they have showing some interest in politics. It was a non-political movement at the beginning with the demand of quota reform, but they already established an organization with the name Jatiyo Nagorik Porishod, and some of them, some of student leaders are expressing their interest in politics. So there is still now some possibility of those students being involved with politics, or they will focus, or they will establish a new political platform. I think uh, 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 all those things will take some days, some months to reshape all the situations. I hope within few months everything will be clear, and we, on behalf of the people, believe that the situation will not repeat in the country. We are believing reforms will take place in every sphere of the society, state institutions or others, and democracy or liberal democracy in its true sense will gradually be established in every uh, aspects of the state.
Thank you. Since you are talking about the Islamic groups being together, I'll just pose this second question to you, Dr. Wahidul Islam. The question is by our friend and also a speaker in the past, Zishan Hashim. Is it possible for Bangladesh to experience the rise of extremist Islamist groups, as many media commentators are mentioning? Is based in London, so maybe the Western press is taking it differently. And I'll quickly mention a second and a related question about, are there any Sufi orders in Bangladesh which have been active in this whole political struggle? So if you can address these 2 points, and then I'll move on to Dr. Munir.
Actually, Islamist, radical Islamist groups are not too much present in the country. These are some politically motivated, or some they raise those issues to demotivate the politics, or to blame Islamist groups as radical one. Especially in case of Bangladesh, we as a citizen of the country, we can claim that all the Muslims, non-Muslims, everyone enjoy freedom in the country. There is no religious restriction in the country. Even the minorities have their full rights in the country. Even during the time of Awami regime or before, all the people enjoyed their freedom of religion. But very few radical groups who are now, it can be said, they are poorly suppressed. So there is no existence of Islamist radical groups. In terms of Mustafa Arji's question, I saw that he talked about the Sufi people or the role of ulama. Actually, at the beginning, the movement was started by the students, and in course of time, all the people from every sector of the society, they provided their support for the students, and ulama also provided their support for the students. Actually, during the last 15 years, everyone was unhappy to the regime. So whenever they found the opportunity to oppose the regime, uh, including ulama, Sufi, or others, they unitedly supported the student movement, and it turned into a revolution against the regime.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tawhidul Islam. Please stay with us as long as you can, and I'll turn some of the questions to Dr. Munir Ruzama. So one question which was earlier asked and related with the last statement by Tawhidul Islam was about the minority groups. And this question was asked by our India fellow, Dr. Azima. And especially she has mentioned some incidents being reported, violence committed against minority groups even during July-August revolution. But broadly speaking, how do you see that in Bangladesh right now, especially the treatment for minority groups? And so that's one question. And then I'll come to the other question of democratic culture and broadly defined.
Well, with regard to minority issue, I mean, that is the minority itself, the minority issue itself is a very minority issue. among many issues in Bangladesh. So minority issue is not a big issue in Bangladesh, but then this is the only issue that the Indian media focus on, which is obviously understandable. We have seen during this time, the revolution time, yes, there was certain incidents of minority violence against minorities reported. But then at the same time, we have seen those Islamist and madrasa students, they were guarding the worshipping places of the minorities, the mandirs, Hindu mandirs. How this can be explained? Then why did, who did this violence to the minority groups? The certain of the reported incidents were true, but those incidents were related to the minority political leaders who were associated with the Awami League, Sheikh Hasina's political party. So there was some social anger, definitely that had the outburst against anyone, any political leader associated with Sheikh Hasina. Now, it was not only the minority groups who were attacked, even people of the majority group, the Muslims, who were also attacked. Why they were attacked? Because they were coteries and associates of Sheikh Hasina. So the minority issue or the rights of minority or violence against minority was not something very special in this case. And it was not widespread in any case. And then those who were traditionally being accused that they caused the violence against minority, the Islamic group, they were found to be the guarding, protecting the minority groups. So there is strong evidence that minority issue is not a big issue in Bangladesh politics. It is highly politicized by the Indian side.
Right. Thank you for
so
that
that's
very clear.
obvious. Yeah.
That's very clear answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Munir Rahman. Let me now bring back a question to you again, Dr. Munir, which was about your central thesis of identity. And let me just read out by Fidaur Rahman, friend from Pakistan, again, a great scholar. Why is the question of indigenous identity being deceived and denied repeatedly? You have mentioned 150 years. And what are the primary motives behind this exclusivist approach?
Okay, yeah, that's a very legitimate and very interesting question, I know, and very academic as well. Well, we shape our national identity according to the theory of nationalism. But national identity is very rare around the world, anywhere in the world, based on exclusive ethnicity or ethnic identity anywhere in the world. That's impossible to locate anywhere. So there are some other dimensions of national identity or people's identity that are brought forward to construct a national identity. In the case of Bangladesh, the land of Bangladesh, where majority of the people are Muslim, and that's why I went back 150 years back in time to show that these people are very much homogeneous in terms of religious identity. But then this religious identity had been allergic to the Indian people, the Hindu people on the other side of the border. And that's why they opposed the creation, the division or the partition of Bengal in 1905. They didn't want to see a Muslim land based on Muslim identity just next to them. They didn't want to see that. So therefore, that partition was later removed. And they wanted to maintain their Hindu supremacy in this region and on the people. This followed again in 1971 when Bangladesh was getting independence, during the independence movement, what India wanted, India didn't want a Muslim identity, a Bangladesh, an independent Bangladesh with Muslim identity. So therefore, lots of terms and conditions were imposed on the government in exile, that what the government would be after the independence. And it was very clear instructions from the Indian side that it must be a Bengali identity-based nationalism over there. And what's the advantage of that? When you say Bengali identity, it automatically aligns with the Hindu identity, because on the other side of the border, in the West Bengal side, they say Bengali and Hindu is the same. Being Bengali means being Hindu, or being Hindu means being Bengali. But on the other side, on the Bangladesh side, we understand that Bengali is an ethnic identity, but Muslim is a religious identity, or Hindu is a religious identity. All right. So we are Bengali in the Bangladesh side. We are Bengali as an ethnic group, but then Muslim as a religious group. So we don't conflict with ethnicity and religious identity in our side. But then if we say that if Bangladeshi people say Bangladeshi national identity, say that it is ethnic Bengali identity first, then the Indian side is very much happy, because they think that, well, we are along the Hindu side. And that is what the Indian side wants us to maintain, this type of identity. All right. So therefore, even though the huge majority of the people in Bangladesh, they want to maintain their Muslim or Islamic identity first, the Hindus or the India on the other side doesn't want to see that. So
Yeah.
and
if I can interrupt you here on this question of identity, because the follow-up question by Zishan is asked that why it doesn't even matter, because in the nation state, in the modern nation state, in democracy, we have all these identities. So isn't it that if we, by emphasizing the identity on that much, we are perhaps contributing to the problem? Like if we emphasize on nation state rather than identity, do you have, as a political scientist, do you have any thought on that? And
Well,
quickly, because please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yes, it's very important, because national identity is important for national policy making. If national identity is like in Bangladesh, national identity is secular and Bengali ethnic oriented, which aligns with the Indian design, then of course our national policy and foreign policy would be in support of India's interest. But and that is very destructive for the entire nation. We have seen over the last 1.5 decades. So national identity is of course important in that way.
Right. Thank you.
If we look at India, all right, even if it is the claim is an inclusive society, but then the national identity is Hindu identity above all. And that is very much expressive throughout society, throughout politics, throughout institutions everywhere. So it is based on this that they formulate their national policies as well as international policies. So national identity for Bangladesh in that case is very important.
Right. Thank you. Since our friend Dr. Tawheed has to leave in a couple of minutes, I have last question, but I want to pose that question, making sure that Dr. Tawheed can share his concluding remarks, and then we have one last question. Are you there for a few minutes, or you have to really go?
Yeah, more 5 minutes.
Okay, so let me then pose the last question to both of you, and I will then request both of you to share in a short, like 1 or 2 minutes each. And the question, I take it, it's from Azima, and it's like a modified version I'm asking. You have mentioned the crisis, the legal and constitutional crisis, and the democratic culture, of course, has has become a challenge, practically speaking. Do you see the need of constitutional changes in future, which are necessary to make sure that the individual rights are protected, protect property rights, economic freedom, and these liberties, which both of you have mentioned, are missing right now, or have been missing for last 1.5 decades at least. Do you see any needs of any change in the future? And do you recommend any changes rather? Please. Dr. Wahid?
Yeah,
Briefly.
that is definitely constitutional changes is vital. Without constitutional change, it is not possible to sustain, especially political liberty. Individual rights are all just kind of issues. For all those things, the constitutional change and changes in different legislation that is definitely required. Without making changes into constitution or current constitutional structure, it will be very difficult to establish political liberty, to secure individual liberty, because we were under the constitution for the last 50 years. What developed under the shadow of the existing constitution? So we witnessed under the shadow of the existing constitution more and more development or development of just kind of lack of democracy, lack of liberty, or fascism or authoritarian regime. So this constitution cannot guarantee political liberty or individual liberty. It requires changes.
Thank you. Dr. Munir Rahman, same question to you.
Okay, thank you. I am rather very pessimistic about this, that constitutional reform will correct everything. Yes, there is a need for certain constitutional reform as well as political reform in terms of the system. For example, the electoral systems and distribution of power among different branches of the state. That is very true. Those fundamental reforms are to be done, and these are very much needed, in fact. But then the ultimate question is, even if you come up with a very nicely drafted constitution, ultimately who will be responsible for implementing those? Who will be executing them? Is the government. And who is government? Government is our representative, elected representative or whatever. If they are not respecting what the constitution say, then definitely nothing will change. Whatever we have experienced time and again from 1971 onward, same thing will happen. It's just like a joke, if I can say in just 1 minute. Like one guy, he went to a restaurant in Russia, and then he asked for the waitress to bring the menu. And there are lots of items on the menu, and then he asked for one item. The restaurant attendant, she said, oh, sorry, we don't have it today. Another item was chosen. Sorry, we don't serve it. Then the third item, oh, sorry, excuse me, is run out. Then the fourth item, sorry again, we don't have it here today. Then the man said, is this a restaurant or is it Russian constitution? That means what? In Russian constitution, everything is there. All the rights and duties and responsibilities and everything is nicely written, but then nothing is served. So exactly like that thing might happen, even if you have a very nicely written constitution, but those who practice politics, I mean the politicians, if they do not behave, then nothing will change.
Thank you so much. I think this was a very enlightening and at the same time sobering example you gave, and that brings us to the end of this very insightful webinar. I just have one observation, and then we can do it in the future. The discussion about the economic institutions and economic development, I think we will need to address that in a future discussion. But I thank both the speakers, Dr. Munir Rahman, Dr. Tawhidul Islam, for their excellent presentations and engagement in question and answers. And I hand over to my colleague Noor to conclude this webinar. I think Noor, on her side, we are facing some problem. Well, let me just then wrap this webinar with thanking again to you both and to our audience. We will publish the recording on our YouTube and on podcast channel, where we'll be able to watch it again and share it. Until the next episode of our Edraak webinar, I say you goodbye and thank you.
Yeah.
Noor, I have already said the last comment, so we can close it.
My apologies. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, it's just, Malaysian internet. I think South Asia is very well known for fast internet compared to Southeast Asia, I think. So just a little quip. But anyway, thank you so much to our speakers for a really interesting session. I have learned a lot, and I did not know much about, the history and centrality of partition and obviously it's a coming off from imperial dynamics and the perpetuation of really historic dynamics, and it's a very exciting discussion to have now, knowing that there's possibility for things to be different in Bangladesh. A recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube. And you will also be expecting short snippets, bite-sized pieces soon that can be circulated on our social media. And do look out for our research brief that will include a lot of the really insightful questions and key points from the discussion today. So if you've not followed our MailChimp, please do subscribe, and our social media pages, and do visit our website once in a while for more events, and of course the next few sessions of Edraak webinar series by Islam and Liberty Network. Thank you to our moderator today, Dr. Ali Salman, and our two speakers, Dr. Tauhidul Islam and Dr. Moniruzzaman Muhammad. So that's the end of the webinar, and see you soon again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you
Hope to
very
see you
much.
again.
Thank you.
Thank you.